Thank you very much, Helen. So I was really pleased to have the opportunity to be able to present on this today because I think it's a really exciting, of course I would say that, but I do think it's a really exciting module that I really enjoy. It doesn't actually feel like having to come in to teach, not that that's the problem, but it's just such a relaxed environment where the staff-student boundaries kind of disappear, and from day one I've always set it up as though we are a mini production company meeting in a regular office space, and we interact as though I am their producer and they all have individual roles as well. To give you some background context before I get into what the module is about and how the assessment runs, just to explain, in a previous life I actually worked for a production company making documentaries and also providing research for other programming and so on. But as part of that, the production company that I worked with, it was actually really small. It had 3 full-time members of staff and then other people like me who would come in on a different basis. So in that respect, it actually quite neatly mirrors the small teams that the students work in. It means that they learn from my real-world experience and then they operate in that real-world experience, albeit within the environment of the classroom. So the documentary module then is part of our public history pathway, and we run it in semester B of level 5. The reason why it's in semester B is quite interesting. It used to, the first year it ran, we had it in semester A, and the students reported back that when they were out doing their filming, because we were coming into the winter and the evenings were getting darker quicker, the amount of time available to them to actually put their filming together became smaller. So that was an interesting thing that we hadn't really thought about and resulted in a move or shift into semester B. It's done over a 2-hour workshop once a week, but for 4 weeks it is independent learning, and that's kind of peppered along the process. So they'll get certain weeks where they'll learn skills, the next week then they'll be out doing those skills themselves and then come back into the classroom. Depending on the number of students who choose to take the module, they are then divided up into small teams that are somewhere between 4 and 5 students. And the aim, after they build their skill set up over the course of the semester, and this is where their main assessment comes from, is that they produce this 12-minute documentary on a topic of their choosing that they have researched and then done all of the supporting technological parts around it. There is also another smaller assessment component right at the end as well, and that's where they do a reflective essay thinking about the individual role that they had within the module, but also how they worked as part of a team and how they interacted with external stakeholders as well. So it's kind of an all-inclusive reflection on what they have achieved. The module starts off, and they're assessed on their understanding of this as well, on the wider context of what makes a good documentary. And as part of that, I send them off to watch lots of different documentaries of different types. So they'll watch stuff from the History Channel, they'll log on to Netflix, make good use of the university's box of broadcasts, for example. Documentaries of different lengths, and not just history ones, but those of a wider variety as well. And then we'll obviously start to kind of digest the different compositions of various types of documentaries. Of course, they'll discover that there is no single template that makes one good documentary, but the idea is that you at least get some of the underpinning themes that are important. And then they also learn about working with experts. Adam, who's sitting in the front row here, one of my colleagues, has been in to share his experience of working as being part of the new generations, isn't that right? Thinkers. We've also had people who've been on the other side, on the screen, for documentaries in the group who've also come along. And then Adam Jones-Lloyd, who some of you may have worked with as well, who does a lot of camera work for the university, also comes in to share his top tips on getting the most out of working with the technology. So they get to hear the real experience of people who have been in documentaries, who've worked behind the scenes in a variety of roles as well. One of the really important things that they also learn is email etiquette, that when they are conducting inquiries with people outside of their class, the proper way to email somebody and to ask would they become involved and so on. Again, it's all part of building up this sense of professionalism. So as I mentioned, from day one, they are repeatedly told we are operating as though we are a real production company out in the real world. So when you email one of your lecturers and ask them to be a talking head in the documentary, forget that you know them and that they know you. You approach them as though you are meeting them for the first time. And hopefully that will stay with them then when they graduate. So I'm going to show you, it's only a clip of a minute long. It's the introduction to one of the documentaries that was produced by one of the teams in the 2015-16 cohort. And here we have Callum Cockrell, who decided to take on the role of being on-screen presenter. I'll talk more about the roles in a moment. But this documentary achieved a first. Adam was the second marker on it. And the external examiner was particularly complimentary of the quality of what had been produced by this team as well. So I'm just going to play you the short introductory clip to their documentary. It was about Queen Elizabeth I, and they had chosen to investigate her life through the lens of the portraits that she had commissioned throughout her career and what they said about her intentions and the way she wanted to project her image. So if we can have the clip, please.
Elizabeth I is one of England's most iconic monarchs. Her reign saw the reformation of the Church of England and the defeat of the Spanish Armada. She is celebrated for creating a sense of stability in the country, ending a turbulent age that began when her father, Henry VIII, broke with Rome in 1532. This was the beginning of the Golden Age for England. But what do we really know about this Tudor monarch? Here we explore the turbulence and trials she faced while establishing the cult of Gloriana, and how successfully she responded to the many forces that threatened her reign.
So I think you'll agree, there are a few issues of the voiceover and so on, but generally speaking, it is quite a beautifully done introduction to the documentary. We've had various other topics covered since, all of different themes and time periods. And the point is that the students come in the first few weeks and start brainstorming, and eventually they settle on the theme, which I think is really important as well. I never tell them what it has to be. I help them shape it and scale it down. But in order for them to really invest in it and feel a sense of ownership over this major piece of assessment, it has to come from them, and they have to drive it over the course of the 12 weeks as well. One of last year's groups did a really great job as well looking at Spitalfields Market and how the process of gentrification has changed the community feel over quite a long period there. The director of that group then had the opportunity, after they were finished, to meet with a BBC producer and talk about the nature of her documentary. And was given tips on how they might kind of improve it or make some changes to it so that it would be suitable to actually be more publicly or widely circulated as well. So the standard of what a lot of the students are producing is really impressive. The roles that they're divided up to are the ones that you see on the screen there. Again, they have the opportunity to either build on a skill set that they have already achieved, or they can try out something new. But the point is that over the course of the 12 weeks, everybody gets training in the different aspects so that they come out of it with this multi-layered understanding of how a documentary is put together and how they might slip into the different roles in addition to the one that they actually carry through for the semester. So the module is set up from the idea of conceiving a theme through to the finished product. And week by week, when they're not on their independent learning sessions, these are the things they go through. And it's done in the stages that a real production company would also follow. So going from putting together your outline and timetabling how the production will go, through to getting the most out of filming, and that's where Adam Jones-Lloyd typically comes in, to thinking about getting the most out of interviewing. And I don't just give them the camera and say to them, off you go. They get lots of in-house practice first. And our colleague Jennifer Evans came along to be the guinea pig, so to speak. And we practice lots of different ways of how to set up the camera, what type of questions to ask, what type of questions not to ask, and just how to make the whole experience as comfortable as possible. They also learn how to storyboard, how to get the most out of editing. And then in our final session at the end of the 12 weeks, we have the screening where all members of the history group come along. Anyone who's been externally involved, typically our dean, Jeremy Ridgman, has also come. And the students, you can see here, Josh looking very pleased at seeing himself on the screen. And it's a really nice moment. So it's a type of assessment that rather than just submitting it and waiting for the mark to come back, they actually get to actively engage with the assessment at the end. And each team has a half an hour for questions and answers where they can explain the process and the learning experience. So I'm going to finish up in a moment because I'd like to leave time for questions. But the whole purpose of this module, when I was devising it in consultation with my colleagues, was to bring the real-world experience into the classroom, to make sure that the graduate attributes identified by the university are embedded into the module. And it's great in the reflective essay to see the students themselves identifying it and actually using the language out of the graduate attributes documents. Our external examiner for the last 3 years has repeatedly singled out the employability skills that the students develop in this module as a model for good practice. And it's really, at the end of the day, about communicating history in a different way. In simplicity rather than being simplistic, and that's the key point, in a way that is direct, in a way that is clear, so that the wider community can engage with complex topics in a way that's enjoyable, but also academically rigorous as well. And I will leave you with this. I'm not actually going, but for the Q&A part, with one of the anonymous comments from the MFQ a couple of years ago, where one student really, in a very reflective way, had thought about the skills that she had gained through this module that led to this final major piece of assessment. Thank you. Thanks, Helen.
And just great to see those skills developing in our students. I think we're a small enough group we can probably manage without a microphone. Peter, you might have to shout at the back. Have your question.
I'm used to shouting, so that's not a problem. Where do you see there's obviously a move to be producing much more multimedia content across all of our subjects? We all like to do it. Where do you see the use of this particular style of documentary? Do you think where you're sort of moving our graduates away from big BBC production into sort of mini website sort of platforms? Yeah,
definitely. The first year that I ran this module, I asked the students to produce it as though it were a documentary for the BBC. But over time, I've gradually shifted the remit. And this year, they were asked to think about where they would like to pitch it. One group wanted to pitch their documentary for A-levels to be used as part of the education system. And another wanted it to be more of a sort of short YouTube type clip where, in line with the fact that a lot of people are using YouTube as one of their main sources of television watching, so to speak, I realise that's contradictory, but wanted to pitch it in that way. So it still has to have all of the research and the academic rigour, but it really challenges them to think about the different types of audience and what needs to happen in it in order to make sure they make the connection with that audience. But you're absolutely right, it needs to, it needs to work in different ways.
I'm just about to introduce, or try to introduce, the module which is devoted to streaming. And I'm interested very much in getting our students to work in visual and digital ways, because it's a music industry management degree. But how difficult or easy is it to assess the contribution of students when we're saying, here, go away as a group and do this thing without guidance?
Yeah.
Because group assessment and feedback is always a real problem for me.
Yes, it is very much built into part of the assessment as well. So the director has to submit a director's log every week where he or she maps out exactly what every member of his or her team has actually done. And we have a regular director and me and my producer role, so to speak, where we sit down and we discuss what the team has been doing. And then, thankfully, we haven't really run into any difficulties, but if there were a situation where someone hasn't been pulling their weight, we would assess it. The other thing that I asked them to do at the start of the year is to draw up a contract among their team. And one of the questions in it is, how will you deal with difficult situations? The answer cannot be, we will have open communication, because that sounds great, but what does it actually mean? And I keep sending it back to them until they've come back with something realistic in terms of action points. So behind the scenes and built into the assessment, there are lots of different elements that make sure that we're regularly monitoring what's happening on the part of each person.
Thank you. I think the idea of an agreement between them is a very good idea.
Yeah. If you want to email me, I can send you some of those details.
I will. Thank you very much.
Karen, it's a fantastic integration of all those skills within the discipline.
Mm-hmm.
That was obvious for you because you have that background.
Yeah.
Was that a fight with anyone? To accept that this was relevant in history then?
No, I have to say Adam was there as part of that conversation, and we were generally very open and excited about it. I don't remember there being any opposition to it. I think as well, because it's on the Public History Heritage Studies pathway, one of the key aims of that pathway is to communicate history in a different way to different audiences. And so it was a natural home for it. But I think even if we were to try and introduce it as part of our history programme, I can't imagine within the group there would be much opposition. And I know certainly Jeremy as our dean has been very supportive of it too.
I'm just thinking about accessibility and digital resources.
Mm-hmm.
Do the teams have to provide subtitles or a transcript to go along with the documentary?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And up until this stage, they haven't been doing that. But in terms of accessibility and thinking about people with different disabilities and so on, from the coming academic year, that's going to be part of the requirement. I also, I suppose, have to be realistic in terms of how much can be achieved. But one of the things we introduced this year as well was ensuring gender balance when it came to the on-screen presence and so on. So as the module evolves, I suppose, thinking about issues like accessibility, gender balance and all of that have become more embedded in it.
Got lots of questions, I've all got tangled up now. Probably all quite dull and mechanical, but I just wonder, because you've got the documentary itself, but then you've got the reflective essay.
Yes.
How long is the reflective essay?
It's just under 2,000 words.
Okay, now are they weighted, or is it?
Yeah, they are. So I'm totally going to forget. I think don't quote me on this. I can confirm it with you later if you want, but I think it's something like 80%, 20%. So 80% for the documentary, it is a massive part of it. And as part of that, they also have to submit their storyboard. And then the 20% is the reflective essay.
I was just asking, is all the documentation like storyboard, that's part of the assessment?
It is, yeah.
And is there any peer review, peer assessment among the group?
We haven't done formal peer assessment, but every week when they come back, having been away for their independent, the directors of the two teams will swap and fill in the other team what they've been doing and ask for feedback on how the team thinks the other one is getting on. So it's in there, but just not in a formal way.
It's almost like formative peer assessment.
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The particular example you focused on looked at the way Elizabeth was portrayed, and of course that's a fairly well-known issue. There are these fascinating portraits of her. Do you think that this approach creates a bias towards question of iconography, for example, or perhaps the use of maps? and rules out certain subjects. Like if you wanted to talk about the development of the fiscal military state in England after 1688, that'd be quite difficult to do in a documentary way.
Yeah.
If you're talking about the change in portraiture from the first half of the 16th century, 17th century to the last half, and you see it moves from black and white to colour. There's something quite extraordinary that happens around 1660. You know, certain iconographic issues are well done in this, but what about some other kinds of topics? Could you just say something very briefly about the range of types of topics that can be covered with this?
Yeah, so as I said, the students themselves pick the topic. I don't give it to them. But the variety of things that they've done, this is the only one that has focused in on an individual or a time period of reign. We don't teach medieval history as part of our history group, but we teach from 1550 onwards. And the students have really engaged with a lot of early modern stuff as part of that. So they're able to supplement certain images or maps by using talking head features, for example, or by having sort of general environmental landscape shots within the documentary. But the ones that have been produced so far, we have the one, as I said, that have looked at Spitalfields Market, going from black communities, Irish communities, Chinese communities, and their integration with the wider community there. We've had one that has looked at the de Havilland aerodrome, which was an obvious one given the setting. We've had another that was, I'm just trying to think what this year's one was as well. We had one that looked at the bombings in Dresden and the impact on that of everyday life. Now that was a really interesting one because obviously I couldn't send the students off to Dresden to do their filming there, but it wasn't the most successful documentary, I'll be honest, but they still got a 2-1 for it, and they had managed to work around that by getting access to existing video footage or contemporary video footage that wasn't within copyright and so on. So the nature of the assessment, I don't think, has limited the scope of the topic that they can do. It does force them to be more creative, but as I explained to them, the production company that I worked with, because we didn't have big budgets and so on either, we had to be creative. And so I've shared a lot of the ways that we got around certain things, and they've been able to adapt it for their situation as well.
I kind of was promised Stefan. You'll have to catch Ciara in the coffee break.
Oh, I feel so popular. It's great.
Well, seriously cool module. As a
Thank you.
graduate, I would have done something like that. Thinking about the sustainability of it, it's obviously really wrapped up in your experience, in your previous experience.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I guess thinking in the context of like a learning and teaching conference here, have you got plans to sort of shift some of the learning to some of your colleagues, or is it kind of seen as, oh, that's sort of Ciara's pet project and sort of thing?
It is very much identified with me, but the first year we were going to run it, only the uptake wasn't enough to justify it. Adam was actually going to co-teach with me on it. And I think because enough of us in the group have had direct experience of being involved with the media in different ways and have thought a lot about the process, if I fell under a bus in the morning, heaven forbid, I'm pretty sure that one of my colleagues will be able to step in. We've also talked as well, although it's called Making a Historical Documentary, about different modes of assessment and presentation, like podcasts and so on. And we definitely have the skill set within the group. So if I had to hand the module over, I'd be willing to do so reluctantly. But I'm pretty sure there's others who could step in.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Helen.
A brilliant project. It's really great to see. We've got a few coffee breaks, so you can go and have some refreshments.